My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I had chosen wisely in love. For 6 years, I was married to a man who seemed like every woman's dream. David, my husband, was thoughtful, attentive, and carried himself with the kind of gentle confidence that made me feel safe. At least, that's what I thought. I used to tell friends that David was the steady ground I built my life on. But now, as I look back, I realize I was sleeping on quicksand. And one night, when the illusion finally cracked, I discovered a truth so dark, it almost cost me my life. I still remember the first moment suspicion crept into my mind. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some glaring betrayal. It was a taste. A bitter chemical tang in the chamomile tea David brewed for me every night at 9 o'clock. For years, it had been our ritual. He would set down the same blue ceramic mug in front of me, stir in one spoonful of honey, and wait with a small affectionate smile until I finished every drop. It should have felt comforting. Instead, I began to notice something unsettling. The tea didn't just relax me, it knocked me out, dragging me into a darkness so heavy that I remembered nothing until morning. At first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe stress at work was making me overly tired. Maybe my body was just giving in to exhaustion. But the nagging aftertaste in my tea wouldn't leave my thoughts, and neither would the strange details I noticed in the mornings. My phone moved from the nightstand to the dresser. My work laptop closed, though I'd left it open. Papers shuffled ever so slightly. Little things that made me question if I was simply losing my mind. One afternoon over lunch with my best friend Emma, I finally confessed my fears. "I think someone is going through my stuff at night," I whispered across the table, barely able to meet her eyes. She frowned, setting her sandwich down. "That doesn't sound crazy, Sarah. What makes you think that?" My voice shook as I listed the evidence. The bitter tea, the unnatural sleep, the misplaced belongings. Emma leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Has this started recently? Any new habits?" And when I mentioned that David had been making me tea religiously each night, she went quiet. "Pay attention," she said finally. "Notice what happens after you drink it." That night, I pretended to sip. I let the tea touch my tongue just long enough to confirm what I already feared. It wasn't just chamomile and honey. Something was laced into it, something bitter and wrong. I poured the rest down the drain while David was in the bathroom, my heart racing like I was already committing a betrayal. When he returned, I held up the empty mug with a smile. "All done," I said. His answering grin made my skin crawl. "Good girl." I barely slept that night, forcing myself to stay awake long after David went upstairs. When I finally crawled into bed, I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, pretending to drift off. I heard him pause at the doorway, whisper my name, "Sarah, Sarah." And when I didn't respond, he moved away. My pulse hammered in my ears as his footsteps retreated downstairs. For the next hour, muffled voices floated up from his office. He was making calls, his tone sharper and colder than I'd ever heard his voice, even slipping into an accent I didn't recognize. Around midnight, I heard his steps again. He lingered at the door, then crossed the room. Instead of climbing into bed, he knelt by the window. I cracked my eyelids just a fraction. The sound of wood scraping filled the silence as David pried up the floorboards beneath our window. And there, with my breath caught painfully in my throat, I watched the man I thought I knew pull out a metal box. Inside were wads of cash, stacks of documents, photographs, and God help me, multiple passports, each one with his face but bearing different names. My blood turned to ice. I wanted to leap up, to demand an explanation, to scream that I knew what he was doing, but instinct pinned me down. I stayed motionless, feigning the deep, drugged sleep he had forced on me for weeks, because something told me the truth was even more dangerous than I dared imagine. He thumbed through photos, women's faces, none of them mine. He compared details on passports with his phone screen, his expression twisting into something I had never seen before. A smile, but not the warm, familiar smile I'd fallen in love with. This one was cold, calculating, satisfied, the smile of a stranger. And in that moment, I realized I was lying inches away from a man I didn't know at all. My husband wasn't the gentle partner I thought I'd built my life with. He was something else entirely, something terrifying. I lay frozen beneath the sheets, my body rigid while my mind screamed. Every instinct urged me to run, but fear locked me in place. If he turned and saw my eyes open, if he realized I'd been watching, I didn't know what he might do. So I stayed perfectly still, forcing slow, steady breaths while my heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. When David finally slipped the box back under the floorboards and padded out of the room, I exhaled shakily into the darkness. My entire world had just shifted. The man I had trusted with my life was hiding money, false identities, and photographs of women I didn't recognize. Questions clawed at my brain. Who were they? What had he done? And what exactly was I sleeping beside each night? I barely moved until dawn crept through the curtains. When I opened my eyes, David was lying peacefully next to me, his arm draped over my waist as though nothing had happened. His breathing was deep, steady, innocent. But I knew now that nothing about him was innocent. I stared at the ceiling until he stirred awake, kissed my forehead, and asked if I wanted tea. The words made me shudder. That morning I poured the tea down the sink again, the moment his back was turned. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the mug. I had to tell someone. I needed an anchor in reality, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I called Emma, my voice hushed but frantic, recounting everything I had seen. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss me. Instead, her silence stretched before she whispered, "Sarah, you're in danger. Don't confront him yet. Collect evidence and stay safe." The idea of living even one more night under the same roof terrified me. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just vanish without a plan, not when David had clearly gone to great lengths to cover his tracks. If he realized I knew he could— No, I couldn't even finish that thought. Over the next week, I became an actress in my own home. I smiled when he smiled, laughed when he teased me, kissed him goodnight like nothing had changed. And every night I pretended to drink his tea. My nerves frayed with each charade, but the performance kept me alive. While he worked in his office, I began searching quietly, cautiously. I checked drawers, rifled through files when he showered, and even snapped photos of documents on my phone. Most were mundane bank statements, tax forms, but then I stumbled across an envelope tucked inside an old book. Inside were clippings from newspapers, each article detailing missing women across different states. My stomach lurched as I recognized some of the faces from the photographs he had been studying that night by the window. I dropped the envelope as though it burned me. My hands shook violently as I shoved the papers back and returned everything exactly how I found it. My mind reeled. Was he connected to these disappearances? Was my husband, my David, a monster hiding in plain sight? That night, as I lay stiffly beside him, I couldn't stop the tears that slipped silently onto my pillow. I thought of every memory we'd shared, our wedding vows, the vacations, the nights we held each other after long days, and I felt sick, knowing they were built on lies. The man who had whispered love into my ear might have whispered lies to other women too, women who never got the chance to wake up. I knew I had to act, but I was paralyzed between terror and disbelief. My reflection in the mirror became a stranger, hollow-eyed and trembling. I was living with a man who might be dangerous, who might have drugged me for weeks to keep his secrets hidden, and yet in public we looked like the perfect couple. Emma called me one afternoon while David was out. Her voice was firm. "Sarah, you need to decide. Either you stay and pretend or you run and fight. But every day you wait, you're gambling with your life." Her words sliced through the fog in my brain. She was right. Pretending could only last so long. I needed evidence, undeniable evidence, before I could go to the police. And to get it, I would have to do the unthinkable, dig up that metal box myself. The thought made me want to vomit, but deep down I knew there was no other way. If I didn't find out the truth, I'd always be one sip of tea away from disappearing just like those women. So that night, while David hummed in the shower, I pulled the curtains tight, dragged the chair to the window, and pried up the floorboards with trembling fingers. The box scraped free, cold and heavy in my lap. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he'd hear it over the running water. With shaking hands, I flipped open the lid, and what I saw inside changed everything I thought I knew about betrayal, about marriage, about the man I had vowed to love until death. The lid creaked open, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Inside lay not just money and passports, but something far more sinister: photographs, dozens of them bound together with rubber bands. Some were candid shots of women walking down streets, leaving stores, standing at bus stops. Others were more intimate, taken through windows, faces caught in fear, or worse, unconscious. My stomach lurched as I realized these weren't just strangers, they were being watched, stalked, studied. Beneath the photographs were scraps of paper filled with numbers, dates, and addresses. My shaking hands flipped through them until one familiar image stopped me cold. It was me. A photo of me sleeping in our bed taken from the foot of the mattress. My chest tightened, nausea clawing up my throat. He had been documenting me too, like I was one of his projects. I snapped the lid shut just as the shower cut off. My whole body screamed with terror, adrenaline surging through every vein. I shoved the box back under the floorboards, pressed the boards down, and scrambled into bed, pulling the covers to my chin just as David walked into the room. My body trembled so violently, I prayed he mistook it for sleep. He climbed into bed beside me, his arm draping over my waist as if nothing was wrong. As if he hadn't been drugging me, photographing me, hiding a life that made my blood run cold. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from sobbing. For the next few days, every moment felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over fire. I couldn't let him see my fear. I laughed when he told jokes, kissed him, when he leaned close, pretended to sip the tea he offered. Each night I dumped it secretly into the sink, then lay in bed feigning the deep oblivion he expected. But now, I wasn't just afraid, I was furious. Betrayal burned hotter than fear, igniting something inside me I didn't know I had. He had stolen my trust, my safety, my peace, and I would not let him steal my life. I called Emma again, whispering into the phone from my car during a grocery run. I told her everything: the photos, the box, the image of me asleep. Silence stretched on the other end until her voice, firm and unwavering, broke through. "Sarah, this is bigger than you can handle alone. You need to go to the police." But fear coiled tight in my chest. What if they don't believe me? What if he finds out before they act? Emma's voice softened. "Then gather what you need. Evidence he can't deny. And Sarah, don't wait too long." That night I found myself staring at David across the dinner table, studying his face. The man who once made me feel cherished now looked like a stranger wearing a mask of familiarity. He asked about my day, smiled when I laughed, brushed a kiss across my knuckles. If someone else had walked in, they would have seen nothing but a loving husband. But I knew better. And then something happened that shattered the thin layer of control I had left. As I cleared the plates, David stepped close, his hand brushing against my arm. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, and whispered, "You've been restless lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" Ice flooded my veins. Did he know? Had he seen me? My knees nearly buckled, but I forced a smile. "Just stress," I whispered back. He studied me for a long, suffocating moment before nodding and retreating upstairs. That was when I knew my time was running out. He suspected me. I had to act. The next morning, while David was at work, I pried up the floorboards again. My fingers moved quickly, snapping photo after photo of everything inside the box: the cash, the passports, the lists, the photographs. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone, but I kept going until I had captured everything. Then I put it all back exactly as I'd found it. I sent the photos to Emma with trembling hands, adding a single message: "If anything happens to me, give this to the police." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. But it was fleeting, because that night David came home early. His smile was sharp, his eyes calculating. He set the tea in front of me, the steam curling upward, and said quietly, "Drink." I froze. The mask had slipped. His voice wasn't tender or playful, it was commanding, watching, testing. My pulse thundered in my ears as I raised the mug, pretending to take a sip. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking, waiting. And in that silence I realized the game between us was over. He knew. The steam from the tea curled into my face, and for the first time I couldn't hide the trembling in my hands. David's eyes stayed fixed on me, sharp and watchful like a predator studying prey. My lips brushed the rim of the mug, but I didn't drink. I let the tea touch my tongue, bitter and heavy, before lowering it slowly to the table. Good, he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. But it wasn't the smile of a husband. It was satisfaction, triumph. I excused myself quickly, muttering about being tired, and slipped into bed. My body stiffened under the covers as he lingered in the doorway, his gaze burning holes into me. When he finally turned away, I forced my breathing to slow, pretending once again to be under his spell. Minutes later, I heard the creak of the floorboards. He was back at the window, prying up the secret hiding place. My pulse pounded as I cracked one eye open. This time, though, he didn't just check the contents, he spread them across the floor, organizing documents and photos with frightening precision. He pulled out a phone I had never seen before, speaking in rapid whispers I couldn't fully understand. But one phrase chilled me to the bone: "She doesn't suspect." My nails dug into my palms, leaving crescents in my skin. He thought I was still in the dark, and that was the only advantage I had left. The next morning, I rose early, making coffee instead of tea, insisting I wasn't in the mood for chamomile. David's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The tension in the room was suffocating. He watched me like a hawk as I packed my work bag, and I knew he was testing me. Every movement felt like walking through a minefield. At the diner where I sometimes worked part-time, I met Emma in the parking lot. I showed her the photos I'd taken of the box's contents, my voice breaking as I explained what I had overheard. Her face went pale, her hands shaking as she scrolled through image after image. "Sarah, this is enough to go to the police. This is real. He's dangerous." Fear coiled in my chest. "But if I go and they don't act quickly, he'll know." And then I couldn't finish the thought. Emma's grip tightened on my hand. "Then you can't go home tonight. Not alone." But the thought of disappearing suddenly without a plan terrified me even more. If he realized I'd run, would he come after me? Would he silence me before I could expose him? I went back home that evening, my nerves frayed to threads. David greeted me with dinner, already prepared, candles lit, soft music playing. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a trap. I forced myself to eat, swallowing against the lump in my throat, while his eyes studied me across the table. When dessert came, he poured me tea again, sliding the mug in front of me with deliberate care. "Drink, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but firm. Something in me snapped. I met his gaze squarely and pushed the mug back across the table. "No." The silence that followed was deafening. His smile faltered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "What did you say?" I said no. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. "I'm done pretending, David." For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then the mask cracked completely. The warmth drained away, leaving only cold fury. He stood slowly, his hands flat on the table. "So, you know." I rose too, my knees weak, but my resolve steady. "I know enough." His laugh was low, bitter, nothing like the man I thought I had married. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "Yes," I whispered. "I know exactly who you are, and soon, so will everyone else." I had sent Emma the photos. I had told her if she didn't hear from me by morning, she should go to the police. For the first time, I felt power shift in the room. David's eyes flickered with realization, and for the first time, I saw something that unsettled me even more than his rage fear. But the battle wasn't over. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across me, his voice a hiss. "You should have stayed asleep, Sarah." And in that moment, I knew one of us wouldn't leave this night the same. His words slithered through the air. "You should have stayed asleep, Sarah." Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I stood rooted to the floor, facing the man I had once promised to love. He stepped closer, his breath hot, his eyes cold and unrecognizable. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "Do you have any idea how careful I've been? How long I've kept this hidden?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady. "Careful." "You drugged me, David. You photographed me like I was your prey. You thought I'd never see the truth, but I did." His hand slammed down on the table, rattling the silverware. I jumped, but I didn't back away. For the first time, I realized he was the one unraveling, not me. His mask was gone, and underneath it was a man consumed by his own lies. You think you can destroy me with a few pictures? He sneered. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But the police can. His face paled, his jaw tightening. That was when it hit him he had lost control. Emma had the evidence. Even if he silenced me tonight, the truth would survive. His empire of secrets was already collapsing. For a long, terrifying moment, we just stared at each other. Then his body sagged, and he let out a bitter laugh. You were smarter than I thought. I didn't answer. I just edged toward the door, my heart pounding in my ears. But before I could reach it, headlights swept across the window, and the sound of tires crunching gravel filled the silence. David's head snapped toward the window. My stomach dropped. Who was it? Then came the knock at the door, sharp, firm, authoritative. Police, open up. Relief crashed through me so hard I nearly collapsed. Emma had done it. She hadn't waited. She had gone straight to them. David's eyes darted wildly like a trapped animal. For a second I thought he might lunge at me, but instead he bolted for the window, fumbling with the floorboards, as though he could scoop up his secrets and vanish. But it was too late. The door burst open, officers storming inside, guns drawn, voices commanding him to freeze. David spun around, his face contorted with rage and despair, but he didn't fight. He dropped to his knees, his hands raised as though he knew there was nowhere left to run. I stood there trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks as they cuffed him and read his rights. My husband, the man I had trusted, the man I had loved, was led out of our home in chains, and all I could do was clutch the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. The aftermath was a blur of questions, statements, endless paperwork. The photos, the documents, the passports, they were all taken into evidence. Investigators linked him to multiple disappearances cases that had gone cold for years. The man I thought was my anchor turned out to be a predator hiding in plain sight. In the weeks that followed, I moved in with Emma. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house still made my chest tighten. Every shadow felt like him watching me. But slowly, with therapy, with Emma's unwavering support, I began to breathe again. And in that fragile quiet, I started to understand something. David had stolen years of my life. He had taken my trust, my peace, my innocence. But he hadn't taken me. He hadn't taken the woman strong enough to see through his lies, to fight when it mattered, to survive. For a long time, I thought my story ended the night I discovered the bitter taste in my tea. I thought betrayal was the final chapter. But it wasn't. The final chapter was mine to write, one of survival, of courage, of refusing to let someone else's darkness define my light. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt trapped in a web of lies, if you've ever been gaslit into doubting your own reality, know this: your intuition is not your enemy. It is your shield. And sometimes listening to that small voice inside can save your life. It saved mine. If my story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered a truth about someone that changed everything? Leave a comment below.